Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHD, and welcome back to the channel, guys. It's been pretty much a month since my last live stream here on the channel. Of course, again, apologies for missing the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Obviously, the weather in my part of the UK just didn't allow me to because the signal was, satellite signal was so bad, it was unwatchable, sadly. But yeah, it's been a while since my last stream, and now we have only two race weekends to go. I mean, we've already started this race weekend, of course. There's already been some points scored for certain teams and drivers, obviously, with the sprint race, the final sprint race of the season, which happened earlier today. But we have, obviously, this weekend qualifying and the Grand Prix still to come. And then next weekend is the final race weekend of the year in Abu Dhabi. Just like that, we are right at the end of the season. Even though it's been a very long season, it has the last few weeks have gone by very quickly with how many races there has been. And I am quite excited for this session because looking at sprint qualifying yesterday, which we will get into the results of that session from yesterday just to understand what the, I guess, pecking order is for this weekend. It shouldn't really be that much different from what we saw in sprint qualifying and the sprint race to a degree as well. Yeah, it was not in all parts of the field, but in some parts it was pretty close and quite exciting at the end of that sprint qualifying session. So qualifying this evening should be pretty good and pretty close. Even the fight for pole position should be a close one. So I'm expecting it to be, this qualifying, the usual for what we've had in 2024. We've had so many classic moments in qualifying this year, and I'm pretty sure we have a good chance of getting that again here today. And then, no matter really what happens, given how close it looks between all the teams, should set us up for a competitive, good Grand Prix tomorrow in Qatar. Of course, Max Verstappen is your Drivers' World Champion for 2024. Congratulations to him for winning it a week ago in Las Vegas, hitting the jackpot in style. But there is still one important championship left to decide, the Constructors' Championship. And after the sprint race, Red Bull are pretty much out of things. Red Bull are not going to win the Constructors' Championship this year. And it is now between McLaren and Ferrari. Both teams who are desperate to win the Constructors' Championship. Remember, Ferrari have not won a championship in 16 years. McLaren, their last Constructors' title was in the year I was born, 1998, a long time ago. And yeah, those two teams have had so many chances since then to win championships and have not quite hit the mark. And here is a brilliant chance to win a championship, and for both teams to maybe restart a glorious era for them going forward into the future, which of course is going to be an exciting one in Formula One. So yeah, that is of course to be decided, and I will get into what the Constructors' Championship points and positions are looking like in a moment after the sprint race. Just to let you know, the sprint race, which finished about, I think 2 hours ago, it finished. Oscar Piastri ended up taking the sprint win for the second year in a row, winning the sprint in Qatar. He was, though, let through by Lando Norris at the very end as a repaying the favour for what Oscar did for Lando in Brazil in the sprint there. Third was George Russell. Fourth, Carlos Sainz. Fifth, Charles Leclerc. Sixth, Lewis Hamilton. Seventh, Nico Hulkenberg. And Max Verstappen couldn't match the pace of Hulkenberg and ended up finishing in eighth. Obviously, the championship over for Max. He doesn't really, there's nothing more for Max to do this year, so the motivation isn't necessarily there to go out and win the sprint, but was very surprising just how poor Red Bull were there. But as I'll get into later, I do think Red Bull will be a bit better in qualifying. But yeah, it was very close between McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari as well in the sprint, and in qualifying to a degree it was as well, sprint qualifying yesterday. So it should be an exciting qualifying session, especially when it comes to that front, say, 6, 7 positions. Should be exciting and close. But yeah, hope you guys are all well after, again, a month away from streaming for me. And I hope that no matter what time it is in your part of the world, what time zone you're in, hopefully you're all having as best a Saturday as possible. And hopefully you're all safe and well and prepared to enjoy qualifying here in Qatar. Of course, if you can watch along with me, that would be great. But if not, then I will, of course, keep you absolutely up to date with everything that goes on in this Qatar Grand Prix qualifying session. And then another thing, obviously, before we go any further, there is a poll running in the live chat asking you guys, who do you think will take pole position for the Qatar Grand Prix? Will it be Lando Norris, George Russell, Oscar Piastri, or Charles Leclerc? Let me know if those 4 options who you think takes pole. Of course, I'll let you know my predictions soon enough. And yeah, as well, for everybody watching so far, make sure to smash that like button as usual, because it does help the channel. But before we go into yesterday and sprint qualifying and the data from yesterday, let's get into the championship standings and how they are now affected slightly by the sprint race. So we'll start with the driver's side, of course. There you can see in gold, Max Verstappen, your champion on the driver's side. Lando Norris in second. Lando 24 points clear of Leclerc. Unless Lando has a disastrous final couple races, Lando should finish second in the championship. Leclerc will finish at least in third, no doubt about that. Piastri, only 12 points clear of Sainz. It's going to be a close fight that to the end, but I think Piastri probably will just about hold on for 4th place, which would be a great finishing position for him. And then Carlos Sainz 5th, who's been in great form in these last few races. George Russell 6th, actually not too far behind Sainz and Piastri, which I think just shows you how great of a season Russell has had compared to Sainz and Piastri, given obviously Mercedes and the troubles they've had in 2024. Hamilton in 7th, not too far behind his teammate. Perez in 8th. What a disaster of a weekend he's already having. Fernando Alonso is, of course, in 9th. Hasn't scored a point in a long time. I think Singapore was the last Grand Prix, and that was 2.5 months ago. Hulkenberg scored a couple points, so he is only 25 points now behind Alonso in the championship. But on the constructors' side, McLaren obviously scoring maximum points. That means with Ferrari finishing 4th and 5th, which was only, how many points? That was, what? Was it 9 points, I think, for Ferrari in the sprint? Yeah, it was 9 points for them. And McLaren ended up scoring, I think, 15. McLaren are 30 points exactly clear of Ferrari in the championship. Red Bull in 3rd, you can see they are, around 70 points behind now. They're out of the fight. Absolutely no chance they win the Constructors' Championship now. And I think one thing that illustrates just how bad Red Bull have been as a team at scoring points for the Constructors, obviously, Perez is a big reason to blame for that. Look at Mercedes. Obviously, I know they had a really great Las Vegas Grand Prix, scoring 43 points with a 1-2 finish. But by the end of this season, Mercedes are going to be within 100 points of Red Bull, which just illustrates how bad Red Bull have been in the Constructors, really since, say, July. Because after, 7 or 8 races, Red Bull were miles clear of Mercedes. And like I said, by the end of the season, Mercedes are going to be probably within 100 points of Red Bull, which just shows you how bad Red Bull have been in these last few months as a team. And if only Mercedes had started the year as quick as they are now, Mercedes would be definitely at least 3rd in the championship. And Red Bull lucky that isn't the case, because Red Bull would be finishing 4th in the championship. And maybe that's where they will end up next season if they don't end up getting rid of Sergio Perez, who clearly is finished as a Formula One driver at this point. Aston Martin in 5th. They are 34 points clear of Haas, who continue to pull away from Alpine in the fight for 6th. Very important fight that between Haas, Alpine, and Racing Bulls. A lot of money up up at stake in that fight. And obviously for Haas, more important for them than Alpine and Racing Bulls, given that Haas are not financially as big of a team. So, yeah, great to see how well they're doing. And again, not a million miles away from Aston Martin. They're not going to finish ahead of Aston Martin, but they might not be that far away when the end of the season comes. And then, Alpine in 7th, 3 points behind. Racing Bulls in 8th, 6 points behind Haas, 3 points behind Alpine. Williams in 9th. A shame that they're so far away, but they are going to finish in 9th, no doubt about it. And Sauber still do not have a point. They look like they might have got one in Vegas because they were looking competitive to a certain extent at certain points of that weekend, but still, they cannot score a point because that car and the drivers they have is just absolutely below average. But that's how the championship standings are affected after that sprint race. But let's now get into sprint qualifying, which of course occurred yesterday. And as you can see from looking at the top 7 there, pretty close considering, the amount of teams you've got in there, 4 different teams. Not all of the 4 teams, of course, because Sergio Perez ended up down in 16th place, I think it was, for Red Bull. But, half a second separating the 2 McLarens, 2 Mercedes, 2 Ferraris and a Red Bull. That is pretty impressive, I have to say. But Lando Norris was the one getting pole for the sprint. George Russell ended up in P2. Oscar Piastri 3rd, but Piastri did not do really that good of a final lap in sprint qualifying. So I think Piastri definitely could have gone quicker than that. Russell's lap, though, absolutely brilliant. And Russell, I have to say, similar to this Grand Prix last year before his accident with Lewis Hamilton on the first lap of the Grand Prix, Russell having a very good weekend, and also, of course, at the minute is in great form. Dominated the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Obviously in Brazil, he was very good there. So Russell in really top form and one of the best drivers on the grid right now in terms of the current form. Brilliant lap by him. Carlos Sainz in 4th, Charles Leclerc in 5th. I will admit my initial reaction after sprint qualifying was that I thought Ferrari could have done better, but when you go back and look at the times through the session, I don't think really actually they could have. And I think the only reason I was feeling that initially after sprint qualifying was because in practice, Ferrari were really quick. But then, of course, once we got to a more important session, McLaren showed their true speed. And no surprise, McLaren have the best car for this track. I think all knew that was going to be the case. And maybe they're not as far ahead as the others as we expected, but they definitely have got the best car for this track. Sainz ahead of Leclerc, a bit surprising that, but Sainz has also been in very good form in these last few Grand Prix. Max Verstappen in 6th. Maybe Max could have done better than that, but I do think that Red Bull can improve on what they have shown so far. Obviously, in the sprint race, Red Bull were very slow. Slower even than Haas. I don't think that's going to be the case in qualifying or the race on Sunday. I think Red Bull will improve on that. And I think Max Verstappen, I don't think he's in the fight for pole. I definitely don't think that. But I think, 4th, 5th, I think he is definitely still fighting in and around there. And then Lewis Hamilton ending up in 7th, 0.4 of a second slower than his teammate. Very poor effort from Hamilton, but he wasn't too bad in the sprint race. We're still lacking pace compared to his teammate, but he was okay in the sprint race, I would say. And then a bit of a drop off to Pierre Gasly, who ended up in 8th. Hulkenberg in 9th, and Liam Lawson, brilliant performance by him in sprint qualifying to get 10th, even though he gave it all away at the start of the sprint race by falling down to 17th. But yeah, great lap nonetheless. But Gasly and Hulkenberg do look to be, and also Magnussen as well, those three look to be the three main contenders in the midfield. And really, Alpine and Haas have the two best midfield cars right now. You would have to say that's been the case really since we came back from that month's break between Singapore and the US Grand Prix. Since the US Grand Prix, in the midfield, it has been, like I said, all about Haas and Alpine. So yeah, no real surprises there, to be honest. And then the rest of the field, Fernando Alonso ending up in 11th, surprisingly good. And I will tell you now, Aston Martin are not that quick. They have still one of the slowest cars here, but that was nonetheless a very impressive effort from Alonso to nearly get in the top 10 with a car that is just so bad right now. Alex Albon 12th, not a Racing Bulls driver, as I've accidentally put there. Of course, he's a Williams driver. Sorry about that. Valtteri Bottas 13th, decent effort from him. Stroll 14th. Really, Stroll did the best he could. I mean, not that far from his teammate, so you can't really blame Stroll for where he ended up. Kevin Magnussen 15th. Magnussen underperformed, clearly, in sprint qualifying. Ended up 10th in the sprint race, showing that, yeah, he could do a lot better than that. And then Sergio Perez 16th. And all in all, ended up, what was it, 1.4 seconds slower than Max in the end, in qualifying. I know, of course, Max, was in SQ3 and Perez knocked down SQ1, but still, pathetic effort from Sergio Perez. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure what was worse, what he did in sprint qualifying or what he did in the sprint race. Because in the sprint race, he started from the pit lane, obviously trying out new setups, trying to improve on Perez's performance. And Colapinto in the Williams was starting, right behind him in the pit lane as well. As you can see, he ended up Colapinto at the back. And Perez, once the green light goes on, just like he's on a Sunday drive with his grandma, taking his time to release himself from the pit lane. And Colapinto just decides, right, I'm just going to overtake you then. Because Perez, it was like Perez, his mental approach to the sprint race was, oh, well, this is just a practice session. And that approach wasn't just to the race itself, it seemed, but the way he started. He when the light went green, he did not get away immediately. It was like like you would pull away from traffic lights on a public road, like just gradually and slowly. It was so weird to see, and again, piss poor from Sergio Perez, who the only way sorry about my throat, of course, not a lot of experience lately of streaming, but with Sergio Perez, the only way at this point he is going to stay in that Red Bull team is because of the money he brings in. There is literally no other reason at this point that you can point to and say, especially from a performance point of view, and say, this is why they should keep Sergio Perez, or this is why they are going to keep Sergio Perez. The only benefit to keeping him is the mass amount of money that he does bring in with the sponsorships, the personal sponsors that he does have. And he's just brought in a new one, was it a couple of weeks ago? Was it Kit Kat? Something like that. Again, that's the only benefit to having him in your car at this point. And I don't like saying that because, Perez to a degree has always been a pay driver because he's always had quite a lot of money with him in terms of sponsorship money. But I've never liked to paint Perez as a pay driver Because before these last couple years, Perez performed like a top 10 Formula One driver. He didn't need the money necessarily to be on the grid and be in a good spot. He deserved where he was at. He was a very good midfield level performer. And even at Red Bull was, in 2021 and 2022 especially, doing a great job. But in the last couple years, he mentally has just tapped out. So I can't defend the guy anymore. He's finished. He's washed. Whatever you want to call it. He is absolutely finito in Formula One. And the only reason you're going to keep this guy around is for money. Which is why, even if Red Bull decide to get rid of him, that doesn't mean Perez, his days are over in Formula One, because there are other teams on the grid that could do with that money that he brings in. Especially, of course, in the midfield. So, yeah. It's just a very sad situation because, it's not like... Sorry. Just choked up there with my throat. It's not like, let's say with Lance Stroll, where, and I made this point in my Lance Stroll video that, of course, was very popular at the end of last year, which, by the way, there is a link to that in the description if you do want to go watch that, if you haven't seen it yet. I made the point in that video that Lance Stroll has been performing at a not very good level for quite a while and has not improved really at all in his time in Formula One. Yet, obviously he continues in Formula One. We know why that is. Obviously his dad owns the team that he races for. But it's not like with... What I'm trying to say is, with Perez, even just a couple years ago in 2022, Perez was performing probably as well as he could have performed, in the Red Bull. You couldn't ask really any more of Sergio Perez. Again, say 2 years ago, or even, if you look back to, say, 2020, when he was in the Racing Point, he was, one of the top few performers in Formula One. But, again, now he's just absolutely nowhere. And it's just, it really is sad to see, because ever since I started watching Formula One, especially at the start of 2012, when I saw the drive of his in Malaysia, where he really should have won that Grand Prix for Sauber, ever since then, I've been a massive fan. And my fandom of him was proven correct for a long time, but in these last couple years, yeah, it's just it's not the same Sergio Perez that we're talking about. But that's the reality of where Perez is, and all I can say is I hope that this is, these next couple races, I hope that these are his final couple races in Formula One, because he's done. He is absolutely done. But anyway, let's go on from that, and let's go on to the sector time data, just to understand why it ended up the way it did, and also why certain teams are quick and why certain others are not so quick this weekend. So the first sector, which is probably, in terms of, what you have in the first sector, it is the highest speed part of the lap, in terms of, you've got the pit straight, which obviously DRS is active for quite a while down that pit straight, and then you've got the first couple corners, and then another little flat out section before you have then, I think, another couple corners, and then pretty much that is, sector one over and done with. The first sector is important to a degree, but it is the least important part of the lap, no doubt about it. But McLaren, no real surprise, pretty quick through there. Mercedes, a bit surprising. They were so quick in the first sector. But if you go back and watch the sprint race, they were very quick down the pit straight. Very quick. I know they had DRS and McLaren didn't, with Russell trying to fight Piastri. But still, that Mercedes was very quick down the pit straight. So I think that has to be playing a role there for Mercedes-Benz. Ferrari almost a tenth behind McLaren. Maybe I think Ferrari could be a slight bit closer, but really, that's not bad, that first sector time. Again, McLaren, you would expect overall for the lap to be quicker, so we can't expect Ferrari to necessarily be, right up there or quicker than McLaren in all of the sectors or any of the sectors, because McLaren are the clear favourites for the type of car they've got. But yeah, decent enough first sector speed. Red Bull, I definitely would expect more from them. At least half a tenth, if not a tenth of a second more pace in the first sector, given that, of course, again, you've got the that pit straight and then a little straight after that, where Red Bull should have an advantage over McLaren. You would expect Red Bull to be a bit closer, but no, unfortunately, Red Bull not quite having the pace they should have in that part of the lap. Racing Bulls, pretty good in the first sector there with Liam Lawson. Alpine, pretty good as well, considering, again, their lack of power from their engine. But one thing I have noticed in the last few races is that Alpine have improved the efficiency of their car in terms of straight line speed, in terms of their car is not very draggy anymore. We saw that in Las Vegas. They were very quick down that very long back straight. So that really is helping them at the minute, and that's a big reason why they're regularly in the top 10 now. Pretty decent first sector for Sauber. Haas, probably you would expect to be a bit stronger in the first sector there, by at least a tenth. Aston Martin, not really a surprise they're that far off. And Williams, though, definitely a surprise. They should not be as far off, say, Alpine in this first sector as they were. 0.3 of a second. It's just, way, way too far, I'm afraid. So Williams have got to step it up through the first part of the lap. The middle sector, though, which I would say is the second most important part of the lap, you have high speed, medium speed corners, and really you get into the real meat of the circuit here in Qatar, the Lusail circuit. And no surprise, McLaren, the quickest team, they do have, in medium and high speed corners, they do have the best car. That has been clear really for the last few months. Mercedes, though, still impressive in the middle sector. Still lapping at a good speed, especially compared to Ferrari and Red Bull. Ferrari, I don't think you could really ask much more of them with their middle sector speed there. Haas, though, very impressive in the middle sector. Did not expect them to be splitting Ferrari and Red Bull. Red Bull definitely can do better, but I don't think they can do that much better. Maybe only half a tenth at most. Alpine, decent. Williams, quite a bit better. Sauber, not too bad. And then Aston Martin, once again, one of the worst teams back there were Racing Bulls, which is a bit of a surprise, even though Lawson did get into the top 10 in sprint qualifying. And then the final sector is the most important sector, where you have so many very important high-speed corners. And also, the reason it's important, that final sector, is not just how well you do through there in terms of keeping it on track and getting the most speed you can through those corners, but with the first couple sectors before the final sector, you really do have to look after your tires to a small extent, because going into that final sector, if you have overcooked your tires, it can cost you. I remember we saw that last year where certain teams went a bit too hard too early, and then in the final sector lacked a tenth or so from just overheating the tires and from the earlier part of the lap. So this final sector is very important, as we have seen here before. Red Bull, I wouldn't say necessarily a massive surprise that they are the quickest in the final sector. Their car is good in high-speed corners, but I didn't expect it to be the best. I thought McLaren would still be holding that title through this part of the lap, but it was Red Bull. But McLaren not too far behind, only 400ths of a second. So not like Red Bull were gaining a massive amount in the final sector. Mercedes also pretty good final sector speed. Not really a surprise that Mercedes look as well as they do. I mean, they don't have the fastest car, but they do look, say, podium competitive for this weekend, which again is not a surprise because even though Mercedes don't do that well in warmer conditions, the track layout does suit their car quite a bit. So that's why they're up there in the action, but not necessarily as quick as they were, of course, in Vegas, where the cold, slippery conditions is really the biggest reason why they won the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Ferrari, I don't think you could expect more from them in the final sector. I think really Ferrari, if you look for the whole lap, I think they're doing pretty much the best they can in terms of their speed. So, yeah, Ferrari, they can just keep up what they're doing and remain about a quarter of a second away from, say, McLaren. If they are on pole, then, yeah, that is realistically the best they can do. Alpine, looking good. Racing Bulls as well, not really a surprise. Aston Martin looking better, which you would expect. Haas, obviously, right there with those teams. Very close between those four teams of Alpine, Racing Bulls, Aston Martin, and Haas. Big drop-off, though, to Williams, a quarter of a second back. Not quite sure why. Their car, if you look at recent tracks through the corners, their car has still been pretty good. I'm not quite sure why they're losing that amount of time. So I think Williams definitely have got quite a bit more time to find and might be the surprise of the midfield in this session. So we will watch out for them because I do, like I said, I do think they can find more time than what they showed so far. And then no surprise, Sauber, the slowest team. But we go back to the top 10 from sprint qualifying. Let's just go through what I believe the pecking order is for qualifying this evening or this afternoon or this morning, depending, of course, on where you are in the world. McLaren have got the best car, not by miles, but I think by probably a tenth, maybe 0.2 of a second at most. McLaren, like I said, I think I've got the best car. Just overall for the lap, they just have, especially in the middle and final sector, their car, I think, is just really, really good. And I think even looking at that final sector from sprint qualifying, I think that was McLaren not really doing the best they could and not quite hitting their potential. I think they could definitely be quickest through that part of the lap, which would further extend the advantage they've got over the others. So, yeah, McLaren, I think I've got the best car. Mercedes, I'm going to go second. Probably maybe a couple tenths of a second ahead of Ferrari. Ferrari, of course, do have the advantage of a very good top speed. Mercedes, though, this weekend look as though they've got a good top speed also. And through the corners, especially the high-speed corners, their car does look good. So I say Mercedes second quickest. And then Ferrari, I think, third ahead of Red Bull. But it is still very close, I think, between the Red Bull of Max and the two Ferraris. So, keep an eye out for that fight. And then in the midfield, I would probably go for qualifying. I'd probably say Alpine. I'd say quicker than Haas. Of course, in the sprint, Haas were quicker, but I think that's more so because in race pace terms, they just have a better car than Alpine do. But in qualifying, I think Alpine have got the advantage. So I'd say Alpine fifth, Haas in sixth, and then seventh, I'd probably go Racing Bulls. And then the last three teams, I'd probably go... Even though Aston Martin ended up ahead of Williams, I'd probably say Williams 8th because I do think there's more potential in that Williams car than there is the Aston Martin. Yeah, Williams 8th, and then Aston Martin 9th, and then Sauber still slowest, but not as far away from the others as they have been previously. So that's my pecking order for this qualifying session, which, by the way, is coming up in just under an hour's time. But let me get into quickly before I come to your comments in the chat, which, by the way, make sure to post any questions you have, F1 related questions, or yeah, just any comments in general regarding this session. Make sure to post it in the live chat, and I will get to them very soon. Yeah, let's just quickly go into my predictions for qualifying. And for me, it will be a McLaren, not just on pole, but a McLaren front row lockout. Oscar Piastri, I did say earlier, could have done better with his final lap in sprint quali. And I think in quali here, he will do better and be closer to Lando. But I still think Lando ultimately will take pole position. So yeah, McLaren front row, Russell, I'm going in third. And then, because I think Red Bull will improve on what we saw earlier, because remember the cars are not quite in parc ferme yet, that's not for another hour. Red Bull will make their improvements, and I think Max will, purely because he is Max Verstappen, get himself ahead of the two Ferraris and the Mercedes of Hamilton. So I'm going Max Verstappen in fourth, Carlos Sainz fifth, Leclerc sixth, Hamilton seventh. Do not think, though, by the way, that's me thinking Red Bull are quicker than Ferrari and Mercedes, because I don't think that. But again, Max obviously has his own effect on things. And then 8th, I think it'll be Gasly. 9th, Hulkenberg. And then 10th, I'm going to go Yuki Tsunoda, who has also, of course, been in good form as of late. Finished 9th in Vegas, 7th in Brazil as well, in those really tricky conditions. So, yeah, Tsunoda, I think, will get into the top 10, because I think the Racing Bulls is pretty decent looking this weekend, even though in the sprint, obviously, it all fell apart with Lawson's horrible start. But let me just quickly come back to here. And yeah, for, say, the next half an hour or so, I will go through your comments in the chat. And there you go. 52 minutes to go until qualifying begins in Qatar. Before I get onto your comments, though, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe for more content like this, because, of course, we do watch-alongs for qualifying and the races. And when it comes to next year, we'll be doing it all once again, so make sure to join us, obviously, for next year. First Grand Prix, March the 15th in Melbourne, Australia. And as well, for everyone watching, smash the like button. Really does help the channel grow and help show me that you guys actually enjoy the content. Make sure to vote in the poll in the chat as well, if you haven't already, to let me know who you think is going to take pole position here in Qatar. And yeah, just in general, post your comments in the chat, and I will get to them in a moment. But just going to check Twitter to see if there's any news. Post sprint race. So just give me a second. And no, can't see anything at the moment. So yeah, no real news going into the session. But yeah, let's come to what you guys are saying in the chat. And yeah, we'll obviously, closer we get to the session, probably in like 20 minutes or so, I'll start going into the teams in depth a bit more and go into how I think they can get the best result they can for the session. And then, of course, a final few things before we actually do go into qualifying on what is today, of course, the last day of November. But yeah, let me just have a quick drink and then I'll get onto your comments. That certainly feels better. Also, just want to let you guys know that, of course, I am doing a race watch along tomorrow. I will be live, as usual, 2 hours before lights out at 2 p.m. UK time tomorrow. Obviously, last week I was supposed to be live and Nib was supposed to join me. And if I didn't have such bad satellite signal, I would have been live for the race and he would have been on. I am not sure yet whether Nib will be on the stream tomorrow. It's looking like a 50-50 by the looks of it at the moment. But I think he will definitely, though, be on for the final race next Sunday in Abu Dhabi. So, yeah, if he's not on this Grand Prix tomorrow, then definitely he will be on next Sunday. The reason he might not be on tomorrow, of course, is because Liverpool, the team he supports and loves, have an absolutely massive game tomorrow, which kicks off at the exact same time that the race starts. So, yeah, we'll have to see. If he doesn't come on, I don't blame him, because that Liverpool game is absolutely massive. It's like a cup final. It is that big. So yeah, we'll see if he comes on or not. But like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. But I would imagine he will definitely be on for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix next Sunday. So yeah, we'll see whether he comes on or not. But just pre-warning you guys in case he is not on, which means of course I'll be solo for tomorrow. But hello Zephron, good to see you all. G Walker says, howdy Chaz and Rooks, I'm dazed and confused here in the US. We're in recovery mode for Thanksgiving holiday. So is this upcoming quali for tomorrow's race? Yep, this is not sprint qualifying or anything like that. This is the proper qualifying session. Absolutely, no doubts about that. Rook saying, I know he had 3-lap newer tyres than Joe, and Joe pulled away. Truly shocking. Oh yeah, talking about Perez in the sprint race. Yeah, Perez. I just don't get how he's performing so badly. Like, I can't imagine at this point it could get any worse. His performance level. It's just incredible how bad he's performing. If you were to throw anyone else in there right now, I think you would get more out of them than what you're getting out of Perez. Because I think not only with Perez is it poor performance, I think mentally Perez just isn't there. I think mentally, he has pretty much just checked out. I don't think he's there anymore. Either because he knows he's not going to be on the grid next year, or he knows that no matter how shit he is and how shit he performs, he will still be a Red Bull driver. Which, if that's the case, then Red Bull cannot be disappointed in not winning the Constructors' Championship when they are literally not making the moves necessary to, make themselves more likely to win the Constructors' Championship. Because, if Red Bull had put Ricciardo or Tsunoda or maybe even Lawson in that second Red Bull, I think Red Bull would have a much better chance at being Constructors' Champions. I'm not saying they would win the Constructors' Championship, but it would give them a much better chance than they've had this year. But ultimately, with Red Bull, it's their decision. We'll have to see what's more important to them, the money or the Constructors' Championship. I am surprised that Red Bull are so... that the money is so important to them. Yes, I know that Perez carries a lot of money in terms of sponsorships, but this is Red Bull we're talking about. A massive company and a massive racing team. They're not exactly desperate for money. This is not Sauber, where you would completely understand. Laurie Rastogi saying Perez might still do well in the midfield. Chazzy, he's rubbish in the Red Bull, but he might still do well in the midfield. Yeah, I think, there is still a chance, of course. He's not completely dead and buried in terms of, not being able to achieve a good result. He can still do that. I mean, we've even seen it this year with him in the Red Bull. He still had a couple decent drives or a couple good results. But I think at this point, it's a risk taking him on because you're risking, taking on a guy who might be finished and clearly past his prime, when you could take someone who, is a lot more likely to get more out of the car on a regular basis. So, yeah, he could still do a job for a team, but you'd be taking a risk because, again, it's not exactly a certainty like it is if you take on a Hulkenberg or a Sonoda or a Gasly right now, where you're getting someone who, half the time, most of the time, is going to deliver the maximum of what is capable in that car. So, yeah. Laurie saying, mind you, Perez might not want to go midfield team after Red Bull. And yeah, I think with Perez, that's why I say that, if Red Bull were to drop him, then I think he's done. I don't think he's coming back because, as well, from Sergio Perez's point of view, what more is there to do in Formula One? I think Sergio knows, unless Red Bull build a rocket ship next season, which I don't think they're going to, Perez is probably not going to win another race in Formula One. So what is there more to achieve? I think if you look at the careers he's had and what cars he's driven, what teams he's raced for, I think Perez has done pretty much the best he could have done. If you look at his career, minus these last couple seasons where he definitely has not done the best he could have done. So, again, what more is there to do if you're Sergio Perez? If Red Bull decide to get rid of you, you may as well just say, you know what, I'm done. And I don't think we would blame him for it. You have to remember Sergio Perez, his first Grand Prix in Formula One was the 2011 Australian Grand Prix. That was almost 14 years ago. So you would be expecting by now Perez would be at the point where, either of his last year in F1 or be leaving F1. You would expect Perez, to be at this point. Same for Nico Hulkenberg, even though Hulkenberg is still performing very well. Hulkenberg's at that point where he's, coming to the last maybe 2-3 years of his career, and the only thing keeping him going is his level hasn't dropped yet, which is why he's still so vital to the teams that he races for. But yeah, with Perez, he is he's done. He's absolutely done, and there's no point keeping round unless you are just that desperate for money. Again, that's the only thing you could keep him round for at this point. Radio speaker saying Perez getting P45. Rooksfoot saying, so are Alpine on the Mercedes engines from next year, or are they maxing out their last few Renault engines as they will not be needed next year because engines are still frozen, right? Yeah, the engine development for these engines is still frozen until the end of next year. But on the 1st of January, the teams can start working officially on the cars for 2026. Obviously, all the manufacturers have been working on the power units for the last 2 or 3 years. For the actual cars themselves for 2026, the teams will be allowed to start working on them on New Year's Day, or from New Year's Day. But yeah, Alpine from 2026 on will be using Mercedes engines instead of Renault. So next year will be the last we see of Renault for quite possibly a long time, because these last few years, not even last few years, let's be honest, the last 10 years of Renault has been an absolute abject failure in Formula One. They have spent what, $2-3 billion probably on development in the last 10 years, and where has it got them? As a works team, they've only had what, is it one race win and a few podiums, and when they were supplying Red Bull, at best only a few race wins and a load of podiums, despite spending, like I said, 2-3 billion, maybe even more in the last 10 years. What an absolute failure Renault have been. And I think that's really why Renault are, when they do leave, I think that's why Renault are going to stay away for quite a while, because to spend that much and waste so much of it, pretty much all of it, for nothing, is going to be the primary reason for why they will be not exactly keen to rejoin Formula One. I mean, that's the reason. I know Toyota have got this technical partnership now with Haas, which is good. But that's the reason we still don't see Toyota back in Formula One as an engine manufacturer or as a team. Same with BMW, because back when, times got hard, those two teams obviously left in a hurry because they had spent way too much for very little reward. And that's why, again, they still are staying away to this day, because that is the main reason, against coming back, is what if they end up doing all of that again. And for Renault, that is going to be the main reason not to come back, is, well, what if we end up spending an absolute shit ton of money again and we get nowhere? Because the last time they did that has been, these last 10 years, and look where it's got them. Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. So, yeah, next year could be the last time in a long time we see Renault in Formula One. Because you have to remember as well, the last times, the other times where Renault have left F1, they didn't necessarily leave on a high, but they left having had some success. Back in the 80s, for example, they had won some races with Lotus, and as a works team, they had a few race wins, and even, probably should have won a championship in, 1983 with Alain Prost. So, there was potential there that they just didn't deliver on. And, when they came back into things in, was it 1989, I think it was? They knew that there was potential there for them to deliver something in Formula One. And of course, in the 90s, they were the most successful engine, of that era. Then they left again, then came back very quickly because, of course, they knew what they could deliver. And they did deliver again, more championships. And since 2001, Renault have been in Formula One, ever since then, on a year-to-year basis, either as an engine supplier or a works team. And yeah, this is now or next year going to be the end. And like I said, because in these last 10 years, they have wasted so much money and got nowhere, there's not going to be that confidence they had before when re-entering Formula One that, well, we had some success a few years ago. I'm sure we can, replicate that. How can they be sure? Let's say in 2030, the FIA or FOM are looking for new engine suppliers. How can Renault be sure as a company that they will come back into Formula One and have any success when their latest attempts have been piss poor at best. So yeah, I think we could go the next maybe 10, even 15 years without seeing Renault in Formula One. One thing is for sure though, this next hiatus from Formula One will be the longest hiatus they have ever had. Because, again, they know that there is absolutely, after what they've done in these last 10 years, no guarantee of success. How do you think Alpine will go once Merc powered? It depends purely on how good the power units are in 2026. If they are the best power units on the grid, then great for them, but who knows? Woden says Yuki has got an end of season test with Red Bull. I think if it goes well, he'll replace Perez. Fingers crossed if that's true, that if he does well, that he'll have that chance. Because I mean, Tsunoda has performed well this year, last year. He deserves an opportunity, absolutely. If Alex Albon deserved a chance when he went to Red Bull, then I don't see why Tsunoda doesn't. What has Tsunoda done that Albon did much. Well, let me rephrase that. What has Tsunoda done that is not as good as what Albon did in his time at Toro Rosso? Tsunoda has surpassed what Albon, was able to do at Toro Rosso. So yeah. Woda says Renault still spent way less than their competitors. It was a waste of money and time. That's true, but at least their competitors actually got something out of the money spent. Obviously, Mercedes got loads of championships. Red Bull did. McLaren eventually have. Ferrari, obviously, another big failure. These previous 10 years, because obviously they've spent an absolutely scary amount for not really much in return. But at least with Ferrari, they have had chances to win the championship in the last 10 years with the money they've spent. With the money Renault have spent, they've not even put themselves in the position to have a chance at being a front-running team or being a championship contender. They've not even got to that point. So it's a much different failure from Renault. Woden saying maybe we never see them again. Maybe. Rook saying you need to be selling to at least one other team just to get double the data when developing. But yeah, Renault. Yeah, if obviously because in 2026 the engines, the power units as we call them, are going to be changing quite a bit, and really it's the first major change of these power units since 2014. When we moved to V6 hybrids. If you look at the era of the V6 hybrid from 2014 to 2025 and you ask who is the biggest failure, without a doubt it is Renault. Even though Honda at their worst were diabolical, they still ended up winning a championship. But Renault, like I said, spent an absolute shit ton of money to go fucking nowhere. But, yeah. Anyway, keep your comments coming in the chat. I'll still read some more out, so for the next few minutes. One thing I am going to do quickly, though, is just repost the link of the stream back out. And then I will come on to your some more of your comments. Hold on a sec. Come join us here for Watchalong. An exciting qualifying session in Qatar. There you go. But yeah, keep your comments coming. Also, smash a like button if you haven't already. Let's try and get the likes up to 30 plus likes if we can in the next few minutes. And let me know, either in the poll running in the chat or just in the comments in the chat, let me know who you think will take pole position today for the Qatar Grand Prix. And obviously I'll get onto some of those comments and all soon enough. But yeah, just gonna have another quick check of Twitter just to see if there's any further news updates or anything like that. And no, can't see anything glaring. All I can see is football stuff, which of course I follow plenty of that on my Twitter. Woden says George Russell for pole, and also says Damon Schill stacking. I know that made both of us happy. Yeah, when I saw that news, when was it? Was it 2 weeks ago? I think it might have been. Yeah, I was very happy. And if you don't know the news, guys, Damon Hill, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in a week's time will be his last as a Sky F1 pundit. You can guarantee he'll be there to do his last race as a pundit. And thank the Lord for that, because I have never liked him as a pundit. Never liked him. I think his analysis is just not quite as good as others. Say as good as, you know, Martin Brundle or Jenson Button or Anthony Davidson. I just don't think he's that good. And I think a lot of his analysis of, you know, crashes and certain drivers, I think is really based around his own trauma of racing Michael Schumacher, which, as I talked about on stream quite a bit, I think was it like a month ago, how, you know, Damon is still sore over that, those years. Again, that really shaped his worldview in terms of what he thought of certain incidents and certain drivers and that, and it just pissed me off, really. And I always thought with Damon that he was still like a lot of the time playing the victim regarding that whole era with, you know, his fights with Michael Schumacher. You know, just to clarify again, we're not going to go all, you know, back into what I said, but yeah, did Michael do stuff to Damon on track that was bad? Yes, of course he did. What he didn't, you know, what Michael did in Adelaide, turning in, breaking Damon's car, obviously that was bad. No one is denying that. But Damon's response to that the following year in 1995 was one of the worst possible ways to respond to that. Rather than just beating Michael on the track, he not only crashed into Michael twice during the season, he also beat himself. And that's really why Williams got rid of him at the end of 96, was because his 1995 was so poor in what was a championship winning car. Well, it wasn't a championship winning car in terms of it did win the championship, but it was good enough to win the championship in, is the point I'm making. Yeah, his effort was piss poor to the point where Frank Williams and Patrick Head got together and said, let's get rid of this guy at the end of his contract, which they did at the end of 96. And that's why at the time it seemed unfair, because obviously in 96 Damon, you know, dominated and won the championship, but too little too late, I'm afraid. And obviously they replaced him with Heinz Harald Frentzen, who he would be teammates with anyway at Jordan in 99. And Frentzen is also a bane of his career, because obviously when they partnered up again in Damon's final year in 99, Frentzen absolutely obliterated Damon to the point where Damon obviously retired from Formula One at the end of the season. And also the way Damon retired from F1 was, I thought, was really was poor on his side. Where, what was it, like mid '99? He was like, "Oh, I'm gonna retire," and then he stayed, and then he was like, I think he was kind of like indecisive about whether he wanted to retire immediately or at the end of the season. And then if you go and look at the reason why he retired from the final race of his career, it is just, again, it is so poor. I think what is it? Let me just quickly look at the. I think you can try and go find articles around at the time of why he did this, but he basically, in the final race of his career, which was the final race of the 20th century, he retired from the race, according to Wikipedia, on lap 21 of the Japanese Grand Prix. Retired due to mental fatigue. He wasn't even halfway through that race, so it's not like he was, it was like a really hot day, 50, 60 degrees, Celsius. So, you know what I mean? Like something ridiculous in terms of the track temperature. Yeah, he just basically gave up, is what he did. So I have never been a fan of Damon, and I think in this country, the fawning over Damon Hill, I have never. It's not that I've never understood it, I've just never agreed with it. I think a lot of it is because obviously he's Graham's son, and obviously we all love Graham Hill, who was such a fantastic racer himself, and obviously was such an important part of Formula One before he sadly passed away. But yeah, I've never agreed with the fawning over Damon and the support for Damon. I've just never been that big of a Damon Hill fan. And I can tell you now that if I was around back then when he was in the Williams, I would not have been a Damon Hill fan. I can tell you that now because yeah, I've gone back and watched those races. I've watched the season reviews, and the British media loves to make out with Damon like he was this top, like Nigel Mansell or Jim Clark level driver, but he wasn't. He was a massive beneficiary. One, of course, of being part of the family that he was part of. We can't deny that. To be fair, I don't think he would deny that either. But he was a massive beneficiary of being in that Williams when he was in that Williams. Again, he wasn't. I'm not going to say he wasn't good enough for Formula One. He was. He was a good driver, but he was not an elite level Formula One driver. Absolutely no way. Yes, he won a championship. I know, but he was not an elite level driver. The only elite level driver, really, at the time that he won his championship was Michael Schumacher. And that's why, back then, Michael was on his own level. There was no one close to him back then. Because sadly, the quality of the grid did get quite a bit worse in the second half of the 90s compared to the first half of the 90s, which is, not necessarily something that was meant to be, obviously. But yeah, those are just my thoughts overall, I guess, on on Damon Hill. I've never been a fan of his punditry, never been a fan really of him in general in regards to him, in Formula One. I've just never been a Damon Hill guy. And one more thing I will say before we just go on to the teams and I just have a quick, talk about how I think they'll do. Obviously, because I'm British, when people watch my videos, watch my live streams, they have this assumption that, I'm going to be one of those people that loves all the ex and current British drivers we have. I am not that person. I do not give a fuck about, drivers from my home country. and supporting them because of that. I just don't care. I do not care. Certain drivers I like in terms of, them being great drivers. Certain drivers I don't. That's just the way it's always been with me. I don't care where you're from. And just because, Damon was British or is British, same with, other drivers, your Coulthards, Johnny Herberts, Nigel Mansell's, and all the British drivers we've had down the line. Don't think I'm a massive super supporter of all the, all the, say, good to great British drivers we've had, because that is not the case. There are some British drivers that I, really do like who I think had great Formula One careers. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button. Currently, I'd say my favourite British driver is probably George Russell. And then looking back, at ex-British F1 drivers, yeah, Jenson Button, Coulthard to an extent. I thought, especially in his prime, was a very good, consistent driver. Obviously, wasn't on the level of Michael Schumacher or Mika Hakkinen and the absolute elite, but I thought he had a good career considering the teams he raced for and that. Nigel Mansell, absolutely fantastic driver. Jim Clark, what an amazing driver. Sterling Moss, Jackie Stewart, James Hunt to a degree. Yeah. But Damon has always been one of those British drivers that I just have never quite liked as much as the others. But again, when I say I like the others, I'm not saying that I like them to the point where I'm like a massive supporter of them. But I think you catch my drift. Is I've just never been a big fan of Damon. That's just always the way it's been. The one says he beat himself. Love it. Laurie says, just to say, Chazzy, you've never struck me as biased at all. You're objective. Cheers for that. Will F1 saying, I absolutely cannot stand David Croft's commentary. I'll have a party when David Croft gets sacked. Yeah, watching the sprint earlier was painful, as it always is. Watching sessions where I have to listen to his commentary because I don't like David Croft as a commentator. I don't at all. And I think was it Alex Jakes? Is it? And also Ben Edwards. I think those two are far superior to him. What Croft is good at is when there's an exciting moment, he's really good at, it's sounding like, one of those mad commentators. But when it comes to, just his general baseline performance, he is not, for me, on the same level as Alex Jakes or Ben Edwards. Absolutely no way. But anyway, let's come away from that and let's just go through the teams quickly, as we have got only 15 minutes to go, guys, until qualifying. Not very long at all. But yeah, we'll start with, of course, the team that I've just seen. One of their drivers win the World Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen, of course. Red Bull don't really have anything more to fight for. Yes, technically they can win the Constructors' Championship, but we know that's not going to happen. Really, Red Bull are relying on Max Verstappen to somehow get a decent result for them, but I don't think a top 3 in qualifying or even probably the race this weekend is really possible because the car simply isn't good enough. So yeah, they're going to have to rely on Max Verstappen to drag them into a decent position. The best I can see in qualifying is 4th for Sergio Perez. Just please make it at least into Q2. That would be something better than what you've done so far and better than what we saw, I think, last year, where I think even last year at this Grand Prix, Perez was knocked out in Q1. So at least do that. And at least we can say that you're improving to an extent. Ferrari are looking, I think, really as good at this Grand Prix as we expected. We didn't think they would have the best car in qualifying trim. and we expected them to be about probably 2 to 3 tenths of a second off the pace of McLaren, and that is exactly where they are. So, yeah, I don't think you can really complain. The only thing is, though, I do think, obviously, because Charles Leclerc is a better driver than Carlos Sainz, I think most of us would agree with that. There is more potential, I think, with Leclerc to get a better result than there is Sainz. Sainz, I have to say, is driving very well. Not, I'm not being down on Sainz, but I think there's a higher ceiling with what Leclerc can do. And I would like to see if Leclerc, if he could maybe tap more so into his potential, whether maybe there's an extra position that can be got there for Ferrari. But most likely, it looks like they are going to be between 4th and 7th on the grid, which is not great, I will admit. And really, if they do end up qualifying there for the race tomorrow, probably only going to be contenders for the podium, because they'll just be too far away, I think, for to be able to contend for race victory. But that's just the reality of where Ferrari are. So, yeah, 3rd best team, I would say, for this session. Mercedes, a bit surprising to an extent. They are right there with McLaren and not very far off at all. Russell, of course, very quick in the sprint race and sprint qualifying. I expect him to keep that up in qualifying. I think pole position is possible for George Russell. We know that he can pull out a super lap when he wants to. We've seen it so many times this year that he's pulled out some really special laps in qualifying to get positions that Mercedes didn't really deserve to get. So pole position is up for grabs, but most likely I think Russell is looking at 2nd or 3rd in this qualifying session. For Lewis Hamilton, if he could, of course, up his pace and get a bit closer to Russell on pace, maybe Hamilton can get in the top 5, which would be good for Mercedes. McLaren, they have got the fastest car. I think there's no doubt about that. They are the team to beat. And as long as both drivers get the best possible pace out of that car in Q3, it should be a front row lockout, unless George Russell does something absolutely incredible in his Mercedes. So, just got to deliver in Q3. Like I said, in the sprint qualifying, Piastri, the reason he was 3rd was he just didn't do really a good enough final lap. If he can make sure not to do that this time around, he'll be fine. He'll be on the front row with his teammate. And again, same goes for Lando. Just get the best out of the car and you should be at worst in 2nd, but most likely for Lando, given how quick he's looking this weekend, probably on pole. So yeah, McLaren, the team to beat. Aston Martin don't look too bad necessarily. I think they're really more so relying on their drivers, but they still do have, I'm afraid, one of the slowest cars. So don't be expecting anything really from Aston Martin. Racing Bulls don't look as quick, unfortunately, as their main rivals in the championship, Haas or Alpine. But a top 10 is possible with Tsunoda or Lawson. There is no doubt about that. So if they can get a car into the top 10, then they've given themselves, a decent chance of grabbing something from this weekend. Alpine really relying on Pierre Gasly because Esteban Ocon, again, in the drive, for some reason, is miles off the pace of Pierre Gasly, which I'm guessing is because Gasly has newer, better parts on his car. But yeah, Gasly looking good. Even though, he was beaten the sprint race, the pace of the Alpine is still good. And as long as he delivers in qualifying, then really Gasly and Alpine should be at least 9th on the grid, but 8th definitely possible. Williams, I think, have got a bit more potential in their car, so watch out for them. I think Alex Albon is a dark horse to maybe get in the top 10, or even one of the dark horses for qualifying in terms of just being a surprise in the session. Watch out for Albon and Colapinto as well, who didn't have a great start to the weekend, but I think in this session might be able to actually finally deliver something for the team. Sauber, not looking that bad. I mean, they're closer to the others and they're in the action to a degree, but they still have the slowest car. And then finally for Haas, they're looking like one of the quickest midfield outfits, and the aim for them is get both cars into Q3. And if they can do that, then there's no reason why they can't have both cars finishing in the points tomorrow. So yeah, 9th and 10th, 8th and 9th, 8th and 10th, whatever. If they can get that, then I think they'll be very happy with their qualifying effort. And it definitely is possible. It all depends really on Kevin Magnussen, who, as we know, can be a bit intermittent in terms of him delivering performance. But here's a reminder of my top 10 prediction for qualifying. McLaren, I think, will look out the front row with Lando Norris on pole, Oscar Piastri in second. George Russell, I think, will be third, with Max Verstappen in fourth, Sainz in fifth, Leclerc sixth, Hamilton seventh, and then Gasly, Hulkenberg, and Tsunoda rounding out the top 10. And we, guys, have got just over 8 minutes to go until qualifying is underway in Qatar. Give me your final thoughts ahead of the session, and as well keep voting in that poll, which of course will keep running the poll in the chat until the beginning of Q3, which is in about 45 minutes or so from now. And there you go. 8 minutes to go until we are underway. And as usual, make sure to smash the like button. If you haven't already, let's try and get up to, say, 35 plus likes. And by the way, Rook, yes, I am reposting links to the stream. I just did a few minutes ago on my community tab. Yeah, let me just read out final few comments here before we get cracking. Looney Classics, if Lando gets a clean lap, then no chance for Russell. Yeah, I think I can agree with you there. Nicholas, George Russell seemed pretty upset about Oscar. Yes, things got close in the sprint, but I think Oscar was on the edge of breaking the rules with his the way or when he was moving to defend his position, but it was just about okay. It was finally met the driving standards, I think, by Piastri. Gizmo says, yeah, this is why I like your stream, but you look objective to situation, not who or what driver does it. Yeah, exactly. That's really how I always look at things. I mean, yeah, again, certain drivers I like more than others, but that normally is, if you are like a really top, really good, well-performing driver, I'm gonna like you more so than a driver that is inconsistent or doesn't deliver on their potential as much. For example, George Russell, the reason I like him more than Lando Norris is because Lando is just not as consistent, doesn't deliver the potential of his car as much as Russell does, and I just think Russell is a better driver, better quality driver than Lando is. But that's why I've always been a fan of Max and Fernando and Lewis, because obviously these are absolute elite drivers with so much quality, who especially with Fernando and Lewis are still performing into their late 30s and now 40s, of course, with Fernando and pretty much Lewis as well. So yeah, that's just the way I've always been. I've never fallen into the you got to support the British driver because you're British, or you got to support the British team because you're British. I've never cared about that ever, because Formula One to me is more than just a support your country exercise. But yeah. Gizmo saying yes, Russell is a potential world champion, Lando is not. I think with Lando, I wouldn't say he's not a potential world champion, but the scenarios where he would be able to win a championship are very slim. The only way Lando, I think, wins the championship going forward is if McLaren have clearly the best car on the grid, and I'm saying, over half a second quicker than the rest of the field. Then in that scenario, if he does perform better than Piastri, his teammate, or whoever his teammate is, then yeah, Lando is a possible world champion. But as long as Lando is in a car that is close in competitiveness with others like Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, he will never win a world championship because he's not good enough to beat other elite drivers over the course of a season. That's what this year has taught us. Especially someone like Max Verstappen. He's never beating Max over the course of a season if they're in equalish cars. And as we've seen in this year, even if he's got a quicker car by, say 2 or 3 tenths of a second, even then he ain't beating Max. So, yeah. But anyway, let's crack on and go through a final couple things before qualifying here in Qatar. Of course, championship standings. Max Verstappen already your driver's world champion. Lando in second. Leclerc third. Piastri only just ahead. Carlos Sainz in fifth. So Piastri there in fourth. Does need a good qualifying here to set up a good race. Russell in sixth. Hamilton seventh. Perez eighth. Alonso ninth. And Hulkenberg in 10th. And on the constructors' side, remember, of course, McLaren only 30 points clear of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. Very close between those two teams with just 2 races to go. Red Bull in third, pretty much out of the action. Mercedes fourth, Aston Martin fifth. Haas in sixth, only 3 points clear of Alpine, who are only 3 points clear of Racing Bulls in eighth. Williams in ninth, and Sauber pointless in last. But let's go through a few of the top teams and some stats regarding those teams before the important session here. Max Verstappen, remember, took pole position last year in Qatar, so of course watch out for him, especially around a track like this where the driver does make a difference. Max, of course, only taken 1 pole position in Qatar, but Red Bull's last pole position in F1 was 12 races ago at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. And that is probably, by the time we get to the end of the season, going to be their last pole position of 2024. Qualifying just has not been good at all for the Red Bull team. Ferrari, of course, have never taken a pole position in Qatar, but in 2024 have taken 4 pole positions. Leclerc taking 3 of them, Carlos Sainz taking 1 in Mexico, and that was their last pole position in Formula 1 3 races ago in Mexico, and of course have been in good form in the second half of the season. Mercedes did take pole here in 2021 with Lewis Hamilton, of course, dominated that race weekend. Mercedes do have 3 pole positions in 2024, or all of those being with George Russell. Mercedes, though, of course, their last pole position last week in Las Vegas. Can they get 2 pole positions in a row? And for McLaren, of course, never taken pole in Qatar, but they have taken 7 pole positions in 2024. And those 7 pole positions, that's starting all the way from, the Spanish Grand Prix until now, which was mid-season. So since the mid-season point, McLaren in qualifying have been the kings. Their last pole position, of course, only 2 races ago in Brazil with Lando Norris. And now it is time for qualifying in Qatar. And I will get up the timer on screen in the next minute or so, as the session is 10 seconds away from getting underway. So yeah, I will get the timer on screen in a minute and sync it up at the 17-minute mark. Of course, Q1, 18 minutes long in total, and the bottom 5 by the end of the session, whoever they are, will be out in those positions. As the session is underway, and the first car on track, I think, is a Mercedes, if I am correct in saying. as there's a Ferrari there of Leclerc in the pit lane waiting for the queue ahead of him to get out so he can filter out as well. Leclerc's never really had a good Qatar Grand Prix weekend. 2021, he was not very good from what I remember. And last year, I remember him fighting Fernando Alonso, but he was, yeah, I think he finished, was it fifth in the race? Which, I mean, it was the best he could do, but I'm not sure it's, you could really call that a great result. As, there you go. There is the timer on screen. 17 minutes to go in Q1. And of course, as the session goes on, I will update the the positions as we go along. As Leclerc saying nobody is moving, it's crazy. Talking about the traffic ahead of him. As we're now looking at the Haas of Kevin Magnussen, who opens DRS and begins his first lap in qualifying. Of course, Magnussen 15th in sprint qualifying, which definitely wasn't good enough as he runs wide on the exit of turn 1, so not a great start for the Dane, who, of course, this is probably his penultimate race in Formula 1. I think he's had an underrated career, Magnussen. I think, yeah, certain years wasn't quite at it, but if you look especially his time at Haas, I think he's done well. You know, led the team, especially to their best ever finish of fourth in the championship in not fourth, sorry, fifth in 2018, and he was the team leader then. And even in the real bad times of 2019 and 2020 was still, doing the best he could for that team. And then obviously when he came back, led the team again ahead of Mick Schumacher to what was it, 7th in 2022, I think it was, or something like that, or 8th, I can't remember exactly. So, he's been an important part of this team, and they should be forever grateful of the work he's done, because he has absolutely helped this team over the last few years, especially in 2018, where he was one of the probably top 10 best drivers of that season, with him regularly in the top 8 in qualifying, as Magnussen's had his time deleted for that running wide at turn 1, as Bottas and Zhou only times on the board so far. Tsunoda now goes quickest on a 1:22.3. Remember, guys, pole position in sprint qualifying was a 1:21.0. As Tsunoda has now had his time deleted. It's going to be one of those days, I'm afraid, guys. We remember it last year. Times deleted a lot. So Stroll now quickest with Alonso in second. The best time of sprint qualifying, a 1:21.0. Pole position today should be a 1:20.5 or a 1:20.6. Something around that, or maybe at best a 1:20.4, but a mid 1 minute 20 is what you're going to be looking at for pole position. So remember that lap time, a mid 1 minute 20, because if anyone does that, you're looking at maybe not pole, but top 2, top 3 on the grid type pace at minimum. As Alex Albon goes up to 4th place. Sergio Perez now goes 4th, but still behind the 2 Aston Martins. As Leclerc has only gone 2nd for Ferrari, which is a surprise. As Lando Norris has a 1:22.0, which is a second slower than he went in sprint qualifying yesterday. But now Max Verstappen goes quickest, 0.3 of a second quicker on a 1:21.7. I was going to say the best time in Q1 is probably going to be around like a 21.4, 21.5. I think is the best lap time you're going to see in Q1. So the target lap time or the cutoff lap time as Oscar Piastri goes third for McLaren. Yeah, you want to be doing probably a mid 122 at least if you're going to get through to Q2. If you're slower than a mid 122, then you're in trouble. As Hamilton had quite an oversteer moment at turn, I think 12 it was, as he comes through this final sector. I haven't played the F1 game in quite a bit. I refuse to play the new F1 game because the handling model is the worst it's ever been. But I know on the old one, the old F1 game, F1, was it 23? This track on that game was absolute porn, is what it was. Especially that final sector. What an incredible part of the lap that is. As George Russell has done 2 purple sectors. So starting the session off well. And he does a 1:21.5. So there you go. That is pretty much bang on the best time you're going to see in this session. And Russell has already achieved it. So Russell absolutely fine out front. And really the top 5 or so looking good at the moment. Valtteri Bottas very impressively up to 6th. And then we've got Stroll, Leclerc, Alonso and Perez rounding out the top 10. Hulkenberg is in 11th. With Magnussen in 12th. Tsunoda 13th. Zhou in 14th. Lawson is 15th. And then Colapinto 16th. And then all the rest, Albon, Sainz, Gasly and Ocon have not done an official legal lap time, as Albon now does and goes up to 11th. As here comes Carlos Sainz, who goes up to 4th, which is a lot better than his teammate. So Sainz up to 4th, Sergio Perez up to 7th, which is a lot better than what we saw yesterday so far from Perez. Lando Norris, only half a tenth off Russell, now goes 2nd on a 1:21.5 or so. As Fernando Alonso has done a purple first sector in the Aston Martin. We're now looking at Liam Lawson with 9 minutes to go in Q1. Obviously was 10th Lawson in sprint qualifying. Where can he go now? 11th. So 11th and 12th at the moment for Racing Bulls. They look at a bit of trouble to me. They're going to be struggling to get through. As Lance Stroll goes up to 4th place. Aston Martin actually looking decent for once. What is this? As yes, Fernando Alonso goes 3rd with a very impressive lap time. A 1:21.6. Which is baffling as to why they've improved so much, because that lap time from Alonso is nearly a second quicker than they went in sprint qualifying. The best lap time they did in sprint qualifying was what was it, a 1:22.4, I think it was, as Gasly goes up to 5th. And now suddenly Alonso's done a 1:21.6. So, yeah, Aston Martin have found somewhere a lot of pace. I do remember they were quick here last year. But obviously for how diabolical they've been in the last few races, this was not exactly expected. As Esteban Ocon has just completed a lap and stayed 20th, so not quite sure what happened for him. As both Haas now in the drop zone, Hulkenberg and Magnussen, they've not really started well. There's a replay of Magnussen oversteering at turn 4, I think. We are very, very impressed by that lap time of Alonso. Like I said, to go like 0.8 of a second quicker than your best time in sprint qualifying already in Q1, that is very good. Very, very good. I'm curious to see whether they can keep improving as the session goes on. If they can, then maybe Aston Martin are in the fight here. But we're now looking at Nico Hulkenberg, who starts one of his final runs in Q1. Currently 16th. He needs to improve by really at least half a second if he's going to be comfortably making it through. And I told you a mid 122 is what you wanted to be on at least to be going through to Q2. And yeah, Albon in 15th he's done a 122.4. So even a mid 122 is probably not going to be enough. You're probably going to have to do a low 122, like a 22.0 or 22.1 to make sure you get through. As both Haases have not improved their time so far through the first sector, which is a bit worrying. But as I said earlier, the first sector is the least important part of the lap. As Russell saying on the radio, he's going to give Lewis a toe into turn 1, which is good. And Hulkenberg improves his middle sector, but it's not massive. So does Magnussen, but again, not a massive improvement. So I'm wondering whether maybe Haas lost a bit of pace here. But Hulkenberg comes through the final corner nicely and to the line. And yeah, he only goes 15th on a 122.4. That is not good enough at all. He will be eliminated if that's the best he can do. Magnussen, only 12th, and I think that is not good enough either. As Leclerc is actually in 11th. Let me just update that. Then you got Magnussen in 12th, Bottas 13th, and then Lawson, Tsunoda. And yeah, the drop zone, it is, as Leclerc now actually goes 4th. The drop zone is Hulkenberg, Albon, Zhou, Colapinto, Ocon. So both Williamses on their way out. As Carlos Sainz improves up to 2nd. So it's Russell, Sainz, Norris, Alonso, Leclerc, your top 5. Here's a replay of Piastri through the exit of turn 1 into turn 2. And understeering wide and losing probably a 1/10 of a second or so. Not a disaster, but not ideal. And kicking up some gravel for good measure. As we're now looking at Zhou Guanyu, who actually made it into Q2 last week, which I was genuinely amazed to hear when I heard that. But normally this guy is a Q1 elimination guaranteed, so we'll see what happens here. But he's done a very good first sector, 0.3 quicker than Tsunoda in the first sector, who is obviously the driver at risk now. As Lewis Hamilton, we've got in 6th, Verstappen 7th, Piastri's 8th, with Gasly 9th, Stroll 10th. And then, yeah, some of the drivers at risk we've got is, Stroll, Perez, Magnussen, Bottas, Lawson, Tsunoda. As Zhou is continuing to improve. Bit of traffic ahead into the final corner, but they get out of the way in good time. And with 3 minutes to go, where does Zhou Guanyu end up? 11th, which, for as much as I harp on the guy, that is a good effort. But I'm not sure if that's going to get him through. As Valtteri Bottas finishes a lap and does not improve, as George Russell improves again to a 121.3. showing that Mercedes do have really good pace here, and they could be on pole position later. And I think really for this race, if we're going to get a really good race tomorrow, I think we need Russell really to get pole, because if McLaren lock out the front row and they deal with the start okay, then really McLaren should comfortably get the 1-2. So Russell might be the key to spicing up the race tomorrow, as well he was really in the sprint race, as Lando Norris is on a better lap. Not a purple sector though so far, as not a great final corner for Lando. To the line, 10th of a second down on Russell. Still a good lap, but not as good as Russell. 10th of a second down on a 1:21.4. But yeah, he's obviously safely through. And according to AWS, the projected knockout time is a 1:21.9, which is incredibly quick. A 1:21.9, if you'd set that lap time yesterday, that would have got you into SQ3 and probably would have had you, 8th or 9th on the grid. That is just how much the track has improved in terms of grip. As Verstappen improves up to 4th, that should be all okay for him now. As Colapinto 19th on his final Q1 run, can he somehow get through? Would be an amazing effort if he did, because he's had a horrible weekend so far. As Franco, and of course, you must remember, massive crash in qualifying in Vegas, and I think probably is still dealing with the effects of that. And reportedly, Red Bull were about to sign Colapinto to an agreement to put him in the Racing Bulls car next year. But then after that crash in Vegas, got cold feet. So Colapinto might need to pull one out here to help his cause, as Kevin Magnussen improves up to 9th. We'll see if that's good enough for the Dane. Colapinto stays 19th. Ultimately not good enough, as Alex Albon goes 15th, but that definitely won't be good enough, as the checkered flag has now dropped. These are your final laps, as Esteban Ocon stays 20th. Charles Leclerc goes quickest on a 1:21.2. Brilliant lap time by Leclerc, showing that Ferrari have definitely got some pace in the bag. Sainz now 3rd. Sergio Perez goes up to 8th, so he is safely into Q2. Bottas improves again up to 11th. He might just make it through, as we're looking at the two Racing Bulls and Hulkenberg to see whether they can improve. Tsunoda has not improved his first or second sector. Lawson has improved his middle sector. Is it good enough? No, it's not. He stays in 16th. What a shame. Yuki Tsunoda, he goes up to 15th. As now George Russell goes back to quickest on a 1:21.241. Here comes Gasly in 12th, who goes up to P10. He, of course, is safely through. And I believe Nico Hulkenberg has not somehow, he's backed off. He somehow has been eliminated, despite being so quick yesterday and especially earlier in the sprint race. Quicker than Red Bull they looked in the sprint. And now Hulkenberg out in Q1 in 18th place. That is how quickly Formula One changes right there. But guys, Q1 over and done with. Let's go through the drivers that have made it through to the second part of qualifying. George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, Sergio Perez, Oscar Piastri, Pierre Gasly, Kevin Magnussen, Valtteri Bottas, Lance Stroll, Zhou Guanyu, both Saubers getting into Q2. When was the last time that happened? A long time ago, is my guess. And Yuki Tsunoda barely making it through to Q2. And knocked out in Q1, Alex Albon, Liam Lawson, Nico Hulkenberg, Franco Colapinto, and Esteban Ocon. But yeah, I am very much surprised that Albon, Lawson, and Hulkenberg have got eliminated there. Very surprised by that. Because, I mean, Williams, like I said, I thought there was more there. But clearly there wasn't. Lawson and Racing Bulls, I thought there was more there. But by the looks of it so far, they don't look very quick at all. And yeah, Hulkenberg, what on earth has happened? Where has the pace gone? No idea is the answer to that. But at least Kevin Magnussen is through. And if he can get in the top 10 and end up in, 8th or 9th, then at least that is something for them. Hulkenberg, of course, will make progress from 18th on the grid. But yeah, Q2 should be underway in 2 or 3 minutes. The most interesting parts of that session for me was, just how quick the lap time was in the end. 1:21.2. George Russell did. That is very quick in the Mercedes. What do you call it? Yeah, Ferrari also showing a bit of pace. McLaren so far not quite showing their hand. But Fernando Alonso is the driver and Aston Martin are the team that I'm most interested in because, again, Alonso going nearly a second quicker than he did in sprint qualifying in just Q1. I'm very interested to see whether Alonso can keep up that level of performance and even get better as the session goes on. Because, to start the weekend, they weren't really looking that great. But suddenly have come to life. But maybe it was just a bit of a fluke in Q1. We'll have to find out in Q2. Yeah, Q2 will be underway in a couple minutes. And, of course, will be a 15-minute long session. And I'll sync up the timer at the 14-minute mark. So we'll get into that session in a moment. But just seeing some analysis on the SkyPad as usual as to why I think Alex Albon got eliminated. And yeah, had to catch quite the snap of oversteer through the final corner, which did not help. And then here's a look at Lawson through turn 12. And I don't know really what they were looking at there. Yeah, I mean, there's a slight bit of traffic, but nothing there that could have held him up, unless that's what he's going to complain about. And yeah, he does. He says, Alonso purposely slowed up through 9 and 10 when he aborted his lap. It just sucks, man. And then they tell him it was Stroll. Yeah. I don't see how he was held up there. Plus, I'm pretty sure he improved in the middle sector where he was. So, yeah, not quite sure about that one. As Lawson has had a decent return to Formula One. Obviously, had that great drive in Austin from, what was it, like near the back of the grid. Ended up finishing in, what was it, like 9th or something? I can't remember exactly. And then, yeah, grabbed a couple points in those really bad conditions in Brazil. So, yeah, it's been a... I'd probably upgrade that to say it's probably been a good return, given he's had those 2 points finishes. But it has been inconsistent, I will add. But we do have to cut him quite a bit of slack. Obviously, coming into the car with only, 6 races to go. Obviously, he will be permanently on the grid next year. We just don't know which car. It might be the Red Bull on the screen, or it might be the Racing Bulls car, which I think more likely it'll be the Racing Bulls car, but we will find out hopefully in the next, say, 6 weeks or so. Obviously, we've got, I think, less than 6 weeks until Christmas. As here comes out of the pit lane, world champion for the 4th year running, Max Verstappen. Car number 1, and it's going to remain that way for another year. Whether he'll win it next year, though, to complete 5 championships in a row, we will find out. Cannot wait for next season, where we are definitely in for an exciting season from start to finish. And next year, without doubt, is going to be maybe not Max's toughest championship challenge, but it will be up there 100%, because next year I don't think Red Bull are necessarily going to have the best car, with especially how McLaren and Ferrari have ended this season, and also Mercedes to an extent as well. But as I said in my podcast, which I uploaded, I think was on Monday, if he does win the championship next year in a car that isn't the quickest, then absolutely he is one of the top 4 or 5 greatest of all time. There'll be no doubt about that at that point. As George Russell is just going through his first lap here in Q2, did a 1:21.2 in Q1. Let's see what this will be. I assume he's on scrubbed or old tyres, because obviously they want to save a set for later in the session. So this will probably be a mid 1:21, I would expect. And no, it's a 1:21.1, even quicker than he went before. So maybe he was on fresh tyres. Who knows? Obviously, in Q3, we will know the true pace of everyone, because they'll all be on fresh tyres. Ferrari with Carlos Sainz second, 1:21.5. Obviously, we know Ferrari always use old tyres to start Q2, which is obviously a smart thing to do. Oscar Piastri goes second on a 21.3. Leclerc, 21.4, up to third. Max Verstappen is out there. He's on a purple first sector. Lewis Hamilton has only gone 5th on a 21.5. 4.5 tenths nearly off his teammate. As Lando Norris now does a purple first sector. So maybe McLaren starting to show their true hand as Max comes through the final corner and goes quickest on a 1:21.0, showing that Red Bull definitely has improved since the sprint race and sprint qualifying yesterday. As Zhou is up to 7th. And now, well, down to 8th now, because Sergio Perez has gone up. And Perez has actually gone up to 4th place. As here comes Lando Norris, who doesn't have a very good end to the lap. I'm not sure if he was held up there, because I did see a car just flash by. But Piastri is now ahead of Norris, because Norris only goes 4th. And yes, Sergio Perez is in 5th. So McLaren not quite hitting the mark there. But only one driver in the in the drop zone that has actually set a lap time, and that's Kevin Magnussen. But Magnussen's lap time is way off the pace, 18 seconds off the pace. As here is Alonso. Let's see, can Aston Martin keep up their good qualifying so far, or was it just a flash in the pan? As, just forgot. what do you call it? Need to, there you go. There's the second cut-off zone on screen. Obviously, in between the two dotted lines, whoever ends up between there in those positions of 11th to 15th at the end of Q2 will end up, obviously, in those positions. As Kevin Magnussen goes up to 9th, Alonso 3/4 of a second off the pace of Verstappen after the first two sectors. And Alonso now backs off as Bottas goes ahead of Zhou only by 1/1000th of a second. Tsunoda goes 12th and Alonso comes back into the pits. Alonso was on for a lap time that was slower than what he did in Q1, so it's not like he was on for anything special. Here comes Lance Stroll, who only goes 13th on a 1:22.1, which is pretty slow. So maybe Aston Martin there on old tyres. As Pierre Gasly goes 6th on a 1:21.4. That's definitely not old tyres on the Alpine. So Gasly up to 6th. So in the drop zone, Bottas, Zhou, Tsunoda and Stroll and Alonso. Alonso, of course, not done an official lap time as of yet. Sergio Perez sliding wide, even though on an outlap through turn 4. Pretty poor from him. But Perez, 5th currently. If he ends up 5th qualifying, that would be some turnaround from the Mexican. Maybe a career-saving turnaround. And yeah, Alonso went oversteering off the track at turn, I think, 11. That was. So that's why he backed off. Lost, obviously, a lot of time. So we'll wait to see what Alonso and Aston Martin can do, because there is definitely more in that car. Obviously, Alonso did a 21.6 in Q1, which at the minute would be good enough to get him through to Q3. As Oscar Piastri is on another lap. He's done a purple middle sector. If he can go purple in the final sector, might just get ahead of Russell. As here comes the Australian, who was so impressive here last year. DRS open to the line. And yes, he does do a purple final sector, and he does go second, only 0.03 of a second slower than Max Verstappen. So the top three separated by 0.75 of a tenth. As bit of an unsafe release there from the Ferrari on Lewis Hamilton there by it was Carlos Sainz, the car. But yeah, been noted by race control, thankfully. As the two Ferraris come out, and also Lando Norris and Max Verstappen on outlaps. And that will be them on just fresher tyres to just further improve what they've done so far. As Carlos Sainz has completed the first sector, which is not bad. The first sector time he's done. Really, Ferrari, with this lap time, I think they'd be hoping to get themselves into the 1:20. If they can do a 1:20.8, say, here in Q2, then I think that would give them enough confidence that they are in, the fight for pole. But that all depends, of course, on what others do here in Q2. But Sainz not improved his middle sector, so this is not a great lap for Carlos. As George Russell now goes quickest by 1/1000th of a second. As Carlos Sainz stays in 8th on a 1:21.4. He'll have to improve on that. Maybe you have to bolt on a new set of tyres, because I'm not sure if that's good enough. And Lewis Hamilton stays 9th. That probably also might not be enough. As here comes Charles Leclerc, currently 7th goes third, only a couple hundred slower than Russell in first. That is a lot more like it. But still, we're not seeing lap times as quick as I thought we would in this session. 4.5 minutes to go. Obviously, there's still time. But I think a 120.8 is definitely possible here in Q2. Just curious to see if anyone does that, as Max goes back to the top of the timesheets, but still is on a 121.0. Slightly quicker the lap time Max has done than what Lando did. Or actually, no, slightly slower than what Lando did for pole in the sprint qualifying session yesterday. So we're pretty much on par with pole position for yesterday, but it should be definitely quicker today. As we're looking at Kevin Magnussen here, currently in the top 10. And that is what obviously Haas are aiming for. Here is Lando Norris around the final corner. He's not done the best possible lap, but he still goes quickest onto a 120.9, which is getting a lot more like it now in terms of the lap times that will, lay the seat for pole position. Obviously, it's going to be pole position a 120 point something, probably a mid 120, and Lando the first this weekend to venture into the 1 minute 20s. So McLaren still looking good. As we're looking at Kevin Magnussen on what is probably going to be his final run in Q2. Can he produce the goods? Like I said, in years gone by, he used to do this regularly, produce the goods in Q2 and in Q3. I know he's had an abysmal first sector, and I can already tell why, because through turn 4 and 5, he got a big, I think, snap of oversteer. And he's had to back off, so he'll have to go for the lap again in a minute or so. But yeah, him delivering in qualifying is something he, again, used to be able to do a lot, but not quite as much anymore. As Fernando Alonso, we're now seeing on track, on his outlap. And after that very impressive lap time he did in Q1, but again, very curious to see what he can do here in Q2. You would hope at least match what he did in Q1, which would then put him just about at the moment into Q3. That's what, 90 seconds to go in this second part of qualifying. As Kevin Magnussen tries again. I think if Magnussen could improve by, say, 2, maybe 3 tenths of a second, I think that might be enough. As Magnussen soon will be coming up to the first sector point. And lap looking good so far. He's not improved his first sector, but I think he's only slightly slower than what he's done before. And again, the first sector, remember, not as important as the other parts of the lap. As Zhou has done a fantastic first sector, 2 tenths up on Magnussen in the first sector. If we can keep that up for the rest of the lap, he might be in business. As Yuki Tsunoda goes 10th, only 0.003 of a second quicker than Magnussen. As Magnussen does a purple middle sector, this is a very good lap for Magnussen, even though he gets a bit of a swapper on through turn 15. If he keeps it together in this final corner, this will surely be an improvement for Magnussen. He comes to the line. And yes, he goes up to 6th. Kevin Magnussen surely is through. As Zhou ends up 11th. Good effort from Zhou. As Stroll ends up 14th on a 121.9. That's a poor effort from Lance Stroll. Valtteri Bottas, what can he do in 13th? He ends up in 12th, out qualified by Zhou, his teammate. As Leclerc goes second and does a 1:21.0 exactly. Russell stays 4th. Carlos Sainz goes up to 6th. As Lewis Hamilton, the driver at risk, as Alonso goes up to P7. But Hamilton gets himself back into the top 10 and goes 5th. As Max Verstappen has done 2 purple sectors. Perez now the driver at risk, but I don't think anyone below him can improve. As Max Verstappen, oh my goodness, does a 1:20.687. That is an incredible lap time to finish Q2. And that puts Max firmly in the conversation for pole position. No doubt about that with a lap like that. As Pierre Gasly punches his steering wheel as he's surprisingly been eliminated from Q2. But let's go through, guys, who has made it through to the final top 10 shootout here in Qatar. Max Verstappen with such an incredible lap there to end the session. Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso keeping up the very impressive pace they've had in qualifying so far. Kevin Magnussen 9th, great job by him, and Sergio Perez just sneaking through. And knocked out in Q2, Pierre Gasly, Zhou Guanyu, Valtteri Bottas, Yuki Tsunoda, and Lance Stroll. And Q3 will be underway in about, 3 or 4 minutes from now. Of course, will be a 12-minute long session. But, yeah, Gasly, that is surprising because he was looking so comfortable in the top 10 going into those final runs, and he just didn't get it together, didn't do a good enough final lap, and that's what happens when you don't deliver when it matters. But I am seriously impressed by that lap time of Max Verstappen. Now, I will say, Lando Norris did not do a lap right at the end there, so maybe Lando can do that lap time as well. But absolutely, Max has established himself in that pole position conversation and proven why he is the 4-time world champion. Also, shout out to Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin keeping up this good pace that they've just magically tapped into in qualifying. Alonso did a 21.1, I think it was, or a 21.2. I think it might have been actually, 21.2 in Q2 there, which was, good enough to get him through. And if Aston Martin, if they can do like a 120.8 or better in Q3, then they're going to be quite possibly on the 4th row of the grid, maybe even the 3rd row if we have a couple drivers out there who don't quite deliver on their final laps. So, watch out for Fernando Alonso. He might be able to get a surprising result here, which Aston Martin desperately need, not for the championship, but just for morale going into next season. Because remember, Alonso and, Aston Martin have not scored a point since Singapore, which was, 5 races ago, 2.5 months ago. So, again, for confidence and morale, they absolutely need a result like this. As just checked in or tuned in to the ridiculous game going on right now in the Premier League. Arsenal have scored 5 goals somehow in only 52 minutes. That's incredible. Anyway, back on to what matters, the Formula 1. And I think And by the way, make sure to keep voting in that poll, which is still going. And for everyone watching, if you haven't already, smash that like button. We're on 32 likes. Let's try and get up to 40 plus likes if we can by the end of the stream. And obviously, yeah, that poll in the chat will keep running for another couple minutes. So if you haven't made your mind up yet, you've still got another couple minutes. But the drivers that I think are in the fight for pole are Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, and then I'm going to put Russell in there as well. Even though Ferrari have looked decent, I still don't. I don't think I've seen enough to suggest that they're going to be pole position worthy. But yeah, Max, Lando, George, and Oscar, I think, are the four that could get pole here. So it's just showing quickly Fernando Alonso on the sorry, on the screen. And yeah, good to see Fernando back in the top 10 and back in the mix. There is just something about this track that the Aston Martin likes, because like I said, last year they did pretty well here whilst having a bad run of form around that time as well. So just something about this track that car really does like a lot more. As we've got a Senna flag in the crowd, good to see. Obviously, there is a bit of Senna media coming out soon. There's the Netflix film biopic about I don't know if it's about Senna's life or just a particular part of Senna's career, but it's a proper film. It's not like the documentary film that came out in 2010, which of course won so many awards. But yeah, we'll see how good it is. Hopefully it's you know a good film. Talking of the film, by the way, obviously the Formula One film starring Brad Pitt is, I think, coming out next year, and it was going viral on Twitter. One of the scenes they filmed in Las Vegas where Brad Pitt was stumbling around after a crash and collapsed on the track, which I really hope they're not going that dramatic with this film, because as you guys know, that has never happened in F1 before, where a driver has crashed and then got out of the car, stumbled along the track, and then collapsed dramatically. So, yeah, I fingers crossed it's not going to be, like that. Because if it is, it's going to be, for us hardcore fans, it is going to be awful if it's like that. But I don't really have very high expectations for that film, I must say. Anyway, the session has begun. We're almost a minute of the way through, and I'll sync up the timer in a moment as we're looking at Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, is it? No, George Russell, who's just coming through the last sector on his outlap. But let me just quickly finish up poll in the chat. Thank you guys for voting. 159 votes, and I asked you guys who will take pole position for the Qatar Grand Prix, and quite clearly 51% of you voted for Lando Norris. I agree. I think Norris will take pole. 22% George Russell, 15% Charles Leclerc, and 10% to Oscar Piastri. Make sure to stick around, of course, until after qualifying finishes, because we will do a vote on driver of the day. But we still have to find out what our top 10 is going to be, as George Russell, I was going to say, starts his first attempt at pole, but clearly is on another warm-up lap. That's Russell is just coming back through the first sector again. So we'll have to wait to see what he can do. As Red Bull keeping Max Verstappen in the pit still, which is interesting. Perez, his teammate, is out there on a lap. So, yeah, interesting strategy there from Red Bull. Maybe they've not got any tyres left or only one set left. That might be part of that strategy. As Kevin Magnussen, this is his first lap in Q3. And he comes out the final corner. What is the lap time? 1:21.5, which is, I'm pretty sure, slower than what he did in Q2. So, not great at all. As Leclerc, so far on his lap, quicker than Sainz after the first two sectors. Sainz understeering slightly to the final corner. That would have cost him probably a few hundredths as he comes to the line to the 1:21.0, which definitely will not be getting him anywhere near pole position. Leclerc, though, 1:20.8, which is better, but again, still that's not going to be a pole position time. As Sergio Perez goes even slower than Kevin Magnussen on a 1:21.7. Here is Lando Norris, who has not done in this first attempt for pole, a purple first sector. George Russell, though, has. Russell half a tenth up on Leclerc after the first sector. And Norris, yeah, he clearly has made a mistake because he's 8 tenths off Leclerc after the first two sectors as Alonso goes up to third on a 21.3. Alonso, we know we can do better than that. He did a 21.2 in Q2. Russell even quicker compared to Leclerc. The middle sector as Lando aborts and comes into the pits. And Alonso actually has had his time deleted. But here comes George Russell. Purple first sector, purple second sector. Can he get onto provisional pole? Yes, he can. A 1:20.5. And that puts him right in the mix for pole position. As Piastri only goes fourth on a 1:21.1. Lewis Hamilton goes third. So first and third for Mercedes. Hamilton still, though, 4.5 tenths off the pace of his teammate. As Max Verstappen, by the way, now on an outlap. As yeah, that's why Lando, he ran wide at turn, I think, was it 4? Got a wheel in the gravel, and then he understeered again for the next corner. So, yeah, that cost him a lot. And according to AWS, cost him half a second. As here is Max Verstappen, the 4-time champion, to start what might be his only attempt at pole position here in Qatar. Got it last year, so he knows the experience of doing it. But can he deliver the lap? He did a 1:20.6 in Q2, so we know he can get on the sort of pace that Russell's on. But can he deliver it straight away? Normally, he can. He's always been very good at straight out of the box, delivering a very quick lap. And already, half a tenth up on Russell, purple first sector. Max proving us all wrong in this session. We didn't think Red Bull would be able to fight for pole, yet they are right in there. As Max looking great through turn 9, 10, and now into the high-speed section. Max barely slower than George Russell after the first two sectors. It is going to be mightily close between Russell and Verstappen as Verstappen comes through. Now, the final corner. Can he edge himself ahead in this fight for pole? Max Verstappen. No, he goes second, half a tenth down on Russell. And if that is Max's only attempt at pole, then, well, he's failed. But we'll see where he ends up, because he is still quite a bit ahead of Leclerc in third, only one position back. I think Leclerc is a quarter of a second slower than Max. So we'll see what Max does. As now we look at Lando Norris, who opens the DRS for what could be his best attempt at pole position. He's still the favourite, Lando. Can he deliver a pole position that McLaren desperately need if they're going to win their first Constructors' Championship in 26 years? As into turn 4 and 5, and this time does not make the mistake he made previously. And the first sector, a 10th down on Russell. Not a great start, but McLaren, really, their car should be better in this second and third sector. So it's not a disaster, but he's messed up turn 7, run too wide, and he's backed off. Don't know if it's because of the Red Bull ahead was distracting him, but he's backed off. And that could be costly, because now he's going to have an extra lap's wear on his tyres, which could make the difference between pole position and maybe second or third or even lower on the grid. You don't know. It is that close here in qualifying, as we've got almost 3 minutes remaining. We now look at Oscar Piastri on the broadcast. 6th currently. We know he can do better than that. And for Piastri, if Lando does mess up here, this is a great chance for Oscar if he can deliver a lap. Because Oscar, yeah, if he takes advantage of any mishaps by Lando, then Oscar could then take advantage of that to even go on and win the race. Because you would expect McLaren to have the race pace to win. But we've got Russell, Leclerc, Hamilton, Sainz, and Perez on an out lap. Lando Norris has obviously just completed a slow lap, as Fernando Alonso has just come out onto track on an out lap, as George Russell technically has started the lap, but he's going to do another warm-up lap. So interesting that certain teams needing to warm up their tyres again. We did see this before, though, I'm pretty sure, here in Qatar. But one thing is for sure, is when we get into that final 90 seconds, we're going to see the final laps of qualifying here, as we're looking at Carlos Sainz, I think it is. Yes, it is. Coming through the final sector. He's currently in P5. 3rd and 5th at the moment for Ferrari, which is, if they were to end up there, I don't think they would be that disappointed with that. Especially if McLaren end up 6th and 9th. I think they'd be very happy, actually. But still many position changes to occur as Carlos Sainz begins his final attempt in qualifying. What can he do? He was quicker than Leclerc in sprint qualifying and the sprint. Can he get himself ahead of his teammate yet again? Which is something he's been doing quite a bit as of late. Carlos has been in very good form. As through turn 4 and 5 he comes. The Ferrari looking very good through there. Very nicely balanced. But he doesn't improve his first sector. Again, though, first sector the least important. As Leclerc's about to complete the first sector, we'll see what he does. And Leclerc also doesn't improve, but his first sector is a lot closer to Russell than it is from Sainz. As Sainz through turn 10. I've got to say, the lap from Sainz, very smooth so far. As he's 3/10 off Russell after the first 2 sectors. So even though it's smooth, it's not very quick. As through the final couple corners, the Spaniard comes. And Leclerc is going quicker than Sainz, but not by much, as Carlos fights the car through the middle of the final corner, comes to the line, and he does improve his lap time, but he doesn't improve his position. He is going to be, he is going to or that he has cost himself quite dearly with that. As Leclerc also improves his lap time but stays third. A 1:20.8 is the best he can do as Piastri now goes third with a 1:20.8. Here comes Lando Norris, only third. McLaren have failed to deliver in qualifying. Third and fourth only, and it could get worse yet. As Alonso goes up to eighth. Here comes Max Verstappen, who's done a purple first sector, not improved his middle sector, but still goes onto pole position. And it will be pole position because George Russell was not able to get across the line and start his final lap before the checkered flag came out. So because of that, Max improves and Max takes pole. Max Verstappen, second year in a row on pole position. Somehow he has taken pole when we least thought it was possible. What an effort from the 4 times champion. George Russell, still a great effort from him in second. He will have many chances tomorrow to get his second win in a row and his third win of the season. Lando Norris third, Oscar Piastri fourth. And there you go. Oh, that is horrible blocking. And apparently, according to Russell, that is Verstappen. And it is. Max horribly blocking Russell through the final few fast corners on the, I don't know if that was on the quick lap or the in lap. But if Russell was on a flying lap, which it looked like he was, then Max surely is going to get a penalty for that. So position changes yet may come at the top of the field. But Norris third, Piastri fourth, McLaren just once again disappointing. And that's just, again, a showcase of 2024. Despite having such promising pace, they still end up behind Max Verstappen. Leclerc 5th, Hamilton 6th, Sainz 7th, Ferrari will be disappointed with 5th and 7th. Alonso 8th, Perez 9th, Magnussen 10th. Great job, by the way, by Fernando Alonso. Still proving that despite the very old age he's at, that he's still one of the top drivers out there. Pierre Gasly 11th, Zhou 12th, Bottas 13th, Tsunoda 14th, Stroll 15th, Albon 16th, Lawson 17th, Hulkenberg 18th, Colapinto 19th. And Esteban Ocon will line up as it stands at the back of the grid for tomorrow's Qatar Grand Prix. What a crazy end. And it isn't over yet. Because I think if Russell there was on a flying lap, which again it looked like he was, then I think Max is going to get a penalty there for blocking, which will be, what, a 3-place penalty? Rooksford is saying, very old. You'll be old one day, Chazza. Absolutely. But let me set up the poll in chat for who you thought driver of the day was. Who is driver of the day for qualifying in Qatar? I will admit I am a bit reluctant if that was Verstappen blocking Russell on a flying lap. I'm a bit reluctant to a degree to put Max as an option. But nonetheless, at the moment, Max Verstappen is the man on pole. George Russell, I'll put in there. And your other options, I will go Fernando Alonso. And I'll put Zhou Guanyu in there purely because not only did he get through to Q2, he outqualified his teammate. But driver of the day for me is George Russell. And the reason I'm going with Russell is because if he wasn't blocked and hampered there, I mean, it was only half a tenth separating Max and George there at the top. I think Russell takes pole if it's not for that. So, yeah, I think Russell is your driver of the day. Max still, very good. Obviously, performance and obviously very quick. But, yeah, I'd go George Russell. And I think Russell, if Max does get a penalty, then I think Russell is going to be very hard to stop tomorrow. But let's see what you guys are saying quickly before we come to the end of the stream here. Elamaine saying a cheater, always a cheater. Shame on Verstappen. He still did the lap, screw the penalty, says the Woden. Looney Classic says, funny enough, Lewis has better race pace than Russell, but he's starting too many races too far back to use it for anything. Yeah, well, that's the story of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, isn't it? If Lewis started on the front row with Russell last week, Lewis would have won the race, but Lewis bottled qualifying, and he knows that he would have won in Vegas if it wasn't for that. Not the biggest Max fan, but it looked like blocking. Yeah, from what we saw briefly, it looked like he blocked him. The Woden says Russell was managing last races, beating Lulu in the championship, as he calls him, not as I call him. But right, so Rooksfurt just posted in the chat, quote, race control have noted Verstappen, but not for impeding. Instead, he's been noted for failing to meet the maximum delta time, which is normally a slap on the wrist. Well, if that was him who was impeding, if he's not even going to be investigated for it, then I have no fucking clue what we're doing here. Because that looked like a slam dunk impeding penalty. So the only way, actually, let me just clarify. If George Russell, if he was impeded on what was an outlap, or let's say Russell was on a warm-up lap, then I can understand why they're not putting him under investigation for impeding. Because if Russell's not on a properly quick lap, then it doesn't matter, really. So, yeah. I guess we'll see. Russell apparently just said, quote, I ended up going through the gravel after coming behind Verstappen. Maybe that's the reason we didn't improve. It was a hairy one. 2 corners before we started our lap. Right. So, yeah, I understand now. So, the reason Russell was going quickly was because he was trying to get round quick enough to start his final lap, and Max impeded him. Now, you could argue that Max was the reason he didn't get round in time, but that's up for the stewards to decide and race control to decide. But technically, that's not an impeding them, because Russell wasn't on a proper fast lap. If he was just at the time trying to just get round to start his final proper lap. So if that's the case, then Max should be fine. But yeah, I mean, if it is Max and Russell on the front row tomorrow, then no problem. That, those two have given us some good moments in the past. But I did say, coming into qualifying, Red Bull will improve based on what they did in sprint qualifying and sprint race, because they always tend to improve as the weekend goes on. Do Red Bull? But I did expect this. I did not expect pole position. But again, Max Verstappen. That's all you can say. Max Verstappen. And as Woden says, epic pole position from the master. But I'll wait till we get, say, a few more votes in the poll, and then I'll finish up the poll and finish up the stream. But yeah, cheers for you guys coming along, obviously, for this qualifying watch along. Make sure to join us tomorrow, live at 2 p.m. UK time, 2 hours, that is, before lights out, for the build up to the race, and then a watch along for the race. As I said, Nib, my co-commentator, might be joining us. Not a guarantee. We'll see. But yeah, we will be live tomorrow for the race, and we will find out, of course, the conclusion of this fight with, Max, Russell. But obviously, we cannot discount the two McLarens, who, of course, were very quick in the sprint, and I think have got better pace than what they showed there at the end of qualifying. I think they've got more pace in the bag. So it's going to be a very interesting race. I think we've got probably 4 drivers in contention for victory, being the top 4: Verstappen, Russell, Norris, and Piastri. So, yeah. You do not want to miss tomorrow's Qatar Grand Prix, which, of course, the Constructors' Championship still not decided. And with McLaren not quite delivering in qualifying, even though Ferrari didn't quite deliver, they'll be definitely right in there, considering, they're only just behind McLaren. But, yeah, we've had a few votes on the poll, and I'll finish it up quick. 10 votes, and yeah, driver of the day for qualifying, according to you guys, is George Russell, 50% of the vote, Verstappen on 30%, and then Alonso and Zhou getting 10% of the vote. But yeah, thank you guys very much for coming along today. Obviously, my first stream in a few weeks. And yeah, make sure to come along tomorrow, 2 hours before lights out at 2 p.m. UK time, for the race build-up and then the race watch-along. Be great to have you along for what is going to be definitely, I think, a good Qatar Grand Prix. Racing Qatar usually does deliver. It's always, it is a very good track. And I think we are in for a good one tomorrow, no doubt about that. So yeah, make sure you join us for tomorrow. Make sure as well to subscribe and smash the like button before you go. Obviously does help the channel grow, helps the channel out as well. And obviously helps me if you smash the like button, show that you guys enjoy the content. Also, don't forget to check out my other bits of content on the channel and join our Discord server, link in the description and probably in the chat as well. Obviously, if you want to keep up to date with our, when we go live, when we upload videos and community updates, the Discord is a great place to be to receive those. But yeah, until tomorrow, guys, at 2 p.m. UK time for the build-up and then the watch-along of the Qatar Grand Prix of 2024, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.